Now, this is the next lesson in the Modern Medicine Through Time unit. Now, with the cause lesson, we looked at sort of everything in one. But for treatment, we're going to have to break it up. So for this lesson, we're going to be looking at the magic bullet. Now, specifically today, we're going to be looking at chemical magic bullets and how science has helped magic bullets develop over time. And then in future lesson, we're going to be looking at bacteriostatic antibiotics. We're going to be looking at the role of penicillin. We're also going to do a separate lesson on treatment by looking at the NHS. Likewise, we're also going to look at treatment with lung cancer as well. So treatment comes in many forms in this part of the course. But what does need to be understood is that treatment in the modern period is developed due to the scientific advancements that we have in the 1900s. We have more possibilities due to understanding and scientific technology to be able to look into theories and be able to turn it into proof and application. So before we start this lesson, there's some recall questions that you can answer. And if you know these, then then this is really positive to be able to reinforce your own knowledge for the GCSE. Who were the two men who developed the DNA model? Give two types of disease smoking would cause. Give two problems too much alcohol can cause. Name another two lifestyle choices that can make someone sick. What was the name of the new microscope that helped magnify DNA? How many times could it magnify? What is a hereditary disease or a hereditary condition? They're the 6 questions that you can be answering. If you pause the video, if you know these, then it's really good to develop your knowledge over time, because it's this quick recall that you're going to need for the exam to be able to take it one step further. So the key debates of this lesson to start off with, to look at magic bullets, we need to know what this is here. We need to know what an antibiotic is. Now, some of you have already been doctor and they've given you antibiotics. So it's very clear. An antibiotic is used to treat bacterial infections by destroying or weakening certain microorganisms, especially bacteria. The key thing with an antibiotic is that you can take it, it destroys the germ without harming the body. Now, in some cases, it destroys the germ. In other cases, it weakens the microorganism. This is why when doctors give antibiotics, they say you've got to take them all. If you only take half of your antibiotics, then it only partially weakens the microorganism, which means you won't fully get better in a hurry. So an antibiotic is a real big deal because it can help people in the form of a tablet. Now, antibiotics take a long time to be able to manufacture and develop. This wasn't always the case. In the 1960s, antibiotics were rushed out. There was a drug, especially called thalidomide, in the 1960s that women took, and unfortunately, it caused birth defects in pregnant women and their babies, and that's because it wasn't trial and tested. Whereas in today's society, if you want a magic bullet or an antibiotic produced, it needs to go through rigorous testing, rigorous trialing to be able to get it right, so that we know that it won't harm the patient. So the point of this is to be able to look at how this developed, how magic bullets developed over time to be able to help the patient. So I'm going to underline a few bits here as we go through. There's a lot of text here, so it's a good idea just to look over it a couple of times to make sure you get your head around it. So by the early 1900s, cure-all pills were being replaced by effective medicines for use in the home and by doctors. Now remember, before 1900, you had herbs that allegedly cured many diseases. You know, before the 1900s, these cure-all pills, and then into the 1900s, were being replaced. Now, one of the medicines that were developed in this time was aspirin, which is used as a painkiller, mainly for headaches. Now, the way in which aspirin was developed, it comes from willow bark, which has been actually used for many centuries before this, but no one knew how it worked. But it comes down to the science, okay? People knew how to test things further, so they knew how things worked. So developments in science allowed scientists to identify the exact chemical in willow bark that was beneficial. And it was then mass produced and marketed as aspirin. So by identifying the chemical that helped people, it could then be turned into an aspirin that helped with issues such as headaches. Pharmaceutical companies such as Boots and Beecham's became worldwide businesses. Now, in today's society, pharmaceutical companies are worth a lot of money because they produce life-saving medicines. But in this stage, Boots and Beecham's, places like this were just starting up. But why were they successful? Number one, they invest in research and development to look for better remedies. People are always looking for better treatments for people, especially because bacteria changes. Using equipment to identify the exact chemical which works as medicine. So by identifying the chemical, you can then create the antibiotic. Using industrial technologies that can mass produce pill in capsules. Capsules are very easy to take, and by mass producing them, then it's available worldwide, which means there's universal care. And by using experimentation and trials to make sure medicines are safe and make sure the correct dosage is administered. You'll see on the front of certain packages of tablets, the amount of 10 milligrams and things like that. It's really important that the dosage is monitored and making sure that the correct dosage is taken per patient, or it could lead to an accidental overdose. So Boots and Beecham's begin to transform the concept of medical treatment. There's 5 questions there. How did science help the development of the cure-all pill? Now remember, by the early 1900s, cure-all pills were being replaced. So how did that concept develop? Why were pharmaceutical companies becoming more successful? What is an antibiotic? What is a chemical antibiotic? And what is a bacterial antibiotic? Now, I've not mentioned those 2 questions. A chemical antibiotic is something that is made using chemicals. It's something that scientists look at to extract the chemical to create the antibiotic. A bacterial antibiotic is something we're going to be looking at in future lessons. A bacterial antibiotic is something that's made through mold. A key example of this is penicillin, something that is an absolute game changer in the face of treatment. So if you just answer those 5 questions, and then we'll move on to the next slide. Now, this is where we look at the development, the actual sort of how did magic bullets come about to be where they are. So, again, we'll just underline a few things as we go. In 1909, Paul Ehrlich, one of Robert Koch's research team, attempted to mix arsenic compounds together to find a remedy for syphilis. So he was trying to find a treatment for syphilis and mixing arsenic compounds. Arsenic's actually kind of a type of poison. But he made 600 different mixtures and he couldn't do it. Why? Because he realized that all of those mixtures could be harmful to humans. His work then was later picked up by a Japanese scientist called Hatta, who found that the 606th mixture destroyed the bacteria that caused syphilis. This was known as Salvarsan 606, but the big problem was that it killed the patient as well. It did kill the bacteria that caused syphilis, but it also killed the patient. Now, some people might think, well, why is this a development for magic bullets? Well, it's a development because it proved that chemicals can kill bacteria. They just needed to get to a position where it was diluted enough to be able to be taken by a patient as well. So it took until the 1930s to find a magic bullet that didn't kill the patient. And you had Gerhard Domach, who tried out a chemical mixture called Prontosil, which is a red dye. And he tried it on mice, which is a common method used by medical experts to trial a chemical mixture or antibiotic on animals like mice. And they found that it killed the bacteria that caused blood poisoning, septicemia. Now, Gerhard Domach didn't trial it on humans until his daughter got sick. Gerhard Domach tried this on his daughter first. She was cured, and it was proof of a chemical cure. She didn't die. Now, the key thing about both Salvarsan and Prontosil was sulfonamide. And drug companies developed this to help find cures for pneumonia and scarlet fever. The key aspect of both Salvarsan and Prontosil was it was made from chemicals. So the key thing here is due to the work of Ehrlich, Hatter, Donach, you started to have chemical treatments that were being trialled. They were using things like sulfonamide to be able to mass produce different treatments for different illnesses, such as pneumonia, scarlet fever, all different illnesses that can cause death. This is a key turning point that chemicals can be used to create a treatment. Now, bacterial magic bullets, the first ever one of those was penicillin, which we will learn about later on in a lot more detail. And this was developed by Alexander Fleming, and then you had it further developed by Florian Chain in 1940. Now, the concept of penicillin is something that most people use then. It's a treatment that doctors tend to go to. And at the start, penicillin saved around 15% of people's lives in D-Day in World War II. Now, the key thing about penicillin was it was made from mold, which encouraged the findings of future bacterial antibiotics, such as streptomycin, which was discovered in 1943 by Watscombe, which helped cure issues such as tuberculosis. What we're noticing in this time period is that some of the biggest illnesses that were a problem in the industrial period were now being dealt with through these cures, these magic bullets that were able to help people through a mixture of chemicals, bacterial antibiotics. And it's something which you could argue was very similar to something in the 1500s when alchemy started to become a thing in the Renaissance period. The key difference between the Renaissance period and now is that we have the technology to be able to develop it further. Whereas in the Renaissance period, it was sort of a lucky concept. Remember, you had some chemicals in the Renaissance period that could kill you if you took it and didn't purge quick enough. Whereas in this period, this couldn't happen because of the testing, the development, and in turn, the scientists that are working on this. So antibiotics developed further in 1945, and they were helped massively by the development of the NHS, which was in 1948. After World War II, 1945, pharmaceutical companies invested more money into discovery and development of other antibiotics. One, to help people, and two, because they realised they would become very wealthy by doing this. So scientific techniques were improved, including better testing and trialling of antibiotics. Now, as I've mentioned, you had that drug there, thalidomide, which caused defects in babies. If you're trialling an antibiotic today, it takes several years to trial a drug. You obviously have human trials where people can be paid to do that, but it is a risk, and it's firstly trialed on things like mice, but no antibiotic will be released into the general circulation of the public until it's basically foolproof and safe. After 1948, the government-funded NHS provided free antibiotics. So there are still occasions where some people have medical exemption if they have a lifelong condition, in which they will get free antibiotics for life. This country in particular, under the NHS, antibiotics are a lot cheaper. If you look at other countries without the healthcare system that we have, it could cost hundreds. Whereas, a great example, it's not an antibiotic, but it's an inhaler. If you want to go to another country, let's say America, for an inhaler, it could cost in excess of £100. Whereas if you want a prescription in this country, I think at the moment, I think it's for £8.60. So it is a lot cheaper, but this is because the government funded the NHS to be able to provide more antibiotics for people. Scientists and doctors communicate their research still, which is very similar to what we had previously. And then new technology also allows to make it easier to create and provide drugs, such as hypodermic needles. They were used to measure dosage of antibiotics to ensure the correct dosage, development of capsules, mass production of pills, and also things like insulin pumps, which we'll look at a bit in a minute. So that's the development of the magic bullet, the development of these little tablets that you can get from the doctor to be able to help you with all sorts of issues in terms of your illness. What you need to do now, there's some tasks down the side. What did Ehrlich and Hatter mix to find a magic bullet? What was the name of it? Why did it not work in the long term, especially Ehrlich? What did Domack do to develop magic bullets and why did his work? What was the first ever bacterial antibiotic? How did science help develop the magic bullets? That's a really key question, because if you've got this in an exam, you need to have an understanding that science drives change. And how did technology help with the development of antibiotics? Really important as well. You pause the video here, and then we can move on to the next part. Right, now imagine you got this question in the exam. An explain question, hopefully we know by now, is a 12 marker. Explain why there was changes in the treatment of disease in the modern period. You might have a stimulus point that says antibiotics. So, here's a list of statements. You could use this as your evidence part of your question. This now is where you have to explain things. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these, but what you've got here is a list of evidence. So, for example, you could say, well, one reason why there was a change in treatment is because antibiotics were created and trials were used for medicine. Why is that a big change? Well, let's go back to what we've learned. So you could say, for example, Domack used the trial of his antibiotic, Prontosil, on mice. This was going to allow a change in treatment as it ensured that the antibiotic was ready for human consumption without causing harm. This is shown when Domack used Prontosil on his daughter, who survived. This led to change as it meant scientists were able to develop ideas and find cures for scarlet fever and pneumonia. So trials being used, Domack's a good example. You can also talk about how trials last for several years now, and how this leads to less harm. So there's no repeat of the 1960s with thalidomide. So there's key explanation there. Okay, even the information about Salvesen 606 killing the patient, it's still important to, this is a turning point for treatment. It's a turning point for treatment because people have the technology to see what works and what doesn't work. Remember, we go to the stage here where people are working in a laboratory. So there's more trial and tested. And yes, even though Salvesen 606 killed people, Salvesen 606 proved that chemical treatment can be an option, which led to work such as Domack. Without the trial and error of Ehrlich and Hatter, would it have led to the work of Domack? Probably not. We don't know. Obviously, we're assuming there. Okay. Going to look at the bottom three. Or the bottom two, sorry. The NHS helped develop antibiotics due to more investment, improvement in science, and communication between scientists. Well, why is this going to cause change? It basically means that people are now focusing on attacking the bacteria. This is a new concept. This is because at the end of the day, remember, germs weren't found until 1861. So by attacking the bacteria is a new concept, which means that a range of bacteria are going to be dealt with. Now remember, without the work of Robert Koch, this might not have been able to be developed, but his His techniques are now being used in the modern period to identify certain germs. This means there's going to be significant change. Now, penicillin was also a significant change, but we're going to look at that separately. So, if you want to go through these and explain how it causes change, that will help you significantly when it comes to a question about treatment. Modern treatment has not come up in the exam yet. So it is really important that you are able to identify how the role of antibiotics has changed over time. Now, with every development, there's always some form of problem. If you got a how far you agree question that the treatment of antibiotics was a turning point, you have to, with a turning point question, you have to look at both positives and negatives. And there are some clear problems with antibiotics. Now, this was written in the Telegraph newspaper in 2013, and it says, antibiotics are no longer effective. The drugs that have transformed life and longevity and saved countless millions since penicillin was developed in 1928 now saturate every corner of our environment. We stuff them into ourselves and our animals, we spray them on our crops, dump them in our rivers, and ever as emerged at the meeting of science ministers from the G8, paint them on the hulls of boats to keep off barnacles. As a result, an invisible army of super-resistant bacteria has evolved, one that is increasingly claiming lives, currently more than 25,000 a year in Europe alone. Many leading scientists and doctors and politicians are freely adopting the language of global catastrophe. Infections such as TB and septicemia, the scourge of early centuries, are once again killing us at frightening rates. We have used or are using our so-called drugs of last resort. This is saying that antibiotics, if used too much, don't become effective. If you are constantly relying on antibiotics for small illnesses, then when you really need them, it could cause problems. On top of this, you've also got an ever-emerging bacteria that is changing, which means that the current antibiotics can't fight the bacteria. So this is why scientists are always working. One great example is the ever-evolving flu bacteria, which means that every year a new type of vaccine is released for the flu jab. Bacteria just doesn't stay the same. It evolves, it has many different angles to do this, which means that antibiotics also need to change. So it's really important that you identify that, yes, antibiotics are a big step forward for medicine. However, there are still issues due to the ever-evolving world of bacteria and understanding of bacteria. Will we ever fully understand the truth of bacteria, the full extent of it? Of course we won't. It's always changing. The world's changing. But this shows that antibiotics do have some problematic features. Okay, so it's not all roses and it's not all positive. It can still cause problems. Okay, that's the first lesson in terms of magic bullets. We're going to look at penicillin a lot later, but it's really important that we develop the idea of how it started before we take penicillin one step further.